video is going to look at Unit 2.8, market failure, in particular focusing on externalities, common access resources. And there's quite a lot of information on the slides here, just basically reminding you that in terms of introducing this topic, you need to go back to the free market and the understanding that in the free market, through Adam Smith's mechanism of supply and demand, we've always said up to this point that the market will lead to the most efficient allocation of resources. And up to this point as well, you may or may not have heard those terms here, the MPB, the MSB, MSC, MPC, where they now become much more important. I mean, essentially in the free market, the only thing that the free market takes into consideration is the marginal private benefit, the benefit to the individual, the utility or satisfaction that the utility is the utility that an individual gets from consuming the product. And that is represented in a demand curve. Whereas with the supply curve, we have something called the marginal private cost, which is the costs that the firms have to pay to produce the product. The actual money they hand over in terms of wages, rent, raw materials, costs, etc. So the free market only takes those into consideration and ignores something that we're going to call externalities, the external costs and benefits on a third party, somebody who's impacted by the production or the consumption of these products, but there's no sort of transaction that takes place, so no money changes hands, and therefore essentially the free market ignores this particular consequence. And it's fairly obvious in things like smoking. The third party effect there is pretty obvious, and it's the reason why governments do intervene in those markets. So we're going to look at what would happen if they didn't, and then consider the reasons why they do intervene and what they might do to sort of solve the problem. I think there's an interesting sort of area here in terms of smartphones, and this article that's linked sort of looks at something that it happens in China with gaming on smartphones, which essentially blocks people from gaming, young people under the age of 18, on a weekday, school day, and they're limited to 1 hour of gaming at weekends on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So not something that happens in many countries, but a recognition perhaps that smartphones and gaming on a smartphone or a device is not necessarily beneficial for not just the person doing it, but for society overall. And then there's the other obvious ones. Right? So things like education and health are things that we are familiar with as being things that we try and encourage. Smoking, alcohol, things that we try and discourage. Right? So it's all to do with these private costs and private benefits, and a recognition that there are these spillover effects called externalities, giving us the overall sort of marginal social cost of the private plus the external cost, and the marginal social benefit of the private benefit plus the external benefit. Now, the way that we show this diagrammatically is there's 4 diagrams basically you need to know. One is this one, the positive externality of consumption, or merit goods. We refer to them as things like education and health. The free market would bring us to this point here. Let me just mark it with a pen as well. So this point here is our free market equilibrium point, leading to an output in the private sector, Q pri, at this point here. But what we also notice about this product is it creates positive externalities of consumption. Like, it benefits third parties if people are well educated and are healthy, and there is a social optimum level of output, and that's important in terms of therefore meaning more resources should be allocated to this product of Q SOC. So the social optimum point is actually here. Right? This is what we want society to produce. As a consequence, if they don't, if left to the free market, and we only produce at Q pri, the lost production of Q pri to Q SOC creates all these benefits here on my red line, all these benefits that you might get from consuming Q up to Q SOC, which are greater than the costs there, this other red line, of producing this amount. So clearly the benefits are greater than the costs, and that green shaded area we refer to as the deadweight welfare loss of the free market. So the free market, for the first time, we're sort of saying the free market is actually inefficient as a consequence. There's another sort of reference to merit goods. Why does it happen? Well, it might be ignorance or information failure. People don't value the goods enough, and there's positive externalities associated with them. Many goods are already recognized as being merit goods, but there's some things that we don't recognize perhaps as being merit goods. We don't necessarily do anything about it. Going to the gym, for example, or consuming more fruit and vegetables. I mean, there's a little bit of government activity there, but not a great deal. Now, the demerit goods situation is obviously the opposite. So demerit goods are ones that are not good for you and not good for society. So here in this diagram, the marginal private benefit free market will bring us to a point D of equilibrium. And that Q3 is like on the other graph called the private Q pri, PRI, the private if left to the free market level of output. But with this product, there are negative externalities of consumption. So there's always this consumption we're talking about. It affects the demand curve. And the social optimum level of output is actually here at E. And again, what you can see is that if we stay at the free market solution of Q3, we're producing too much of the product. And the extra product we produce from Q4 to Q3, the costs of it here are greater than the benefits here. And therefore we get a deadweight welfare loss, in this case shown by the grey shaded area. So cigarettes and alcohol are the common ones. Now, also included here is a reference to common access resources, things that have rivalry but are non-excludable. Now, a separate video will look at public goods where we talk about rivalry and excludability, but essentially what that means, if a good has rivalry, it means that if one person consumes it, another person can't consume it. There's rivalry in consumption. And the excludable bit means that you can't exclude somebody who hasn't paid for it. Like it's sort of out there, it's freely available for people, and things like the air and rivers and fish, forests, etc. Are all regarded as being non-excludable. People can just use them. The trouble is that there's rivalry in that people don't use them very well. They don't look after them, and they perhaps use too much of it. So we get our fish stocks depleting, or they pollute the rivers, or they cut down the forest. So there's rivalry there in that respect. And that leads to problems with sustainability. And we are then jeopardizing future generations' ability to use and have these products as a consequence. Now, the diagram for this it's not a sort of set in stone, this diagram. So you can use either the negative externality of consumption diagram that we've just seen, or one that we're just about to see, which is the negative externality of production diagram. Either one would be fine to illustrate the common access resource problem. There is also a reference to something called the pollution of poverty, which basically talks about environmental problems that result from the lack of development rather than from the development process itself. We always talk about industrialization and development causing pollution, but actually a lack of development also causes environmental problems in terms of poor quality of water, inadequate housing, sanitation, malnutrition, and disease. So there's a reference to something there called the pollution of poverty. Here's our third diagram. Now we're getting on to production. So we're looking at supply. This is the negative externality of production diagram, the common one that you use for things like pollution. Here's the free market solution there with my red dot, marginal private costs, the supply curve that's shown. Now, for a firm that pollutes the atmosphere, unless we do something about it, that doesn't cost the firm anything. That's what I mean by an externality, an effect on a third party that's not paid for. And once we add in those external costs, the marginal social cost curve is shifted here, and that means the true sort of social optimum level of output is down at Q2. Like we overproduce this product. And again, we can see it in terms of deadweight welfare loss. So that quantity from Q1 to Q2 that we overproduce, the social costs there by that red line are more than the social benefits, and we get that orange area showing the negative externality, deadweight welfare loss of production. A less sort of common example, though, the fourth of our diagrams, is the positive externality of production. So here we're starting at this point. At Q1 is our private output of this product. This is something where the production will actually create a positive externality. The production process, creates the positive externality of the production process. Now, you can actually use this in terms of things like if you're thinking about electric vehicles and the actual production of it, the process of producing electric vehicles is not relevant here, but you can talk about the use of those cars. So actually driving those cars, you could argue its consumption or its production doesn't really matter. But essentially we want more of it. We want to move to this social optimum here. So there are positive benefits of producing these particular cars or producing these types of products. And that extra amount that we want to produce creates these benefits here on that red line, which are more than the costs there on that red line. And the green area is the deadweight welfare loss of staying at the free market solution of Q1. In your subject guide, there's this list of ways that the governments intervene in these markets in response to externalities and common access resources. So they can use all of these methods. You should be familiar with all of them. Indirect taxes, which you've already looked at in Unit 2.7, carbon taxes as well, legislation, various rules, regulations, education, making people sort of familiar, tradable permits, international agreements, like Kyoto Agreement, Paris Accord, and things like that. Collective self-governance is an interesting one because that's a reference to the fact that people, even private firms, sort of recognise that exploiting resources and making things unsustainable is not the future, and so they will self-govern themselves. Maybe you don't need the government with any sort of punitive or draconian sort of rules to stop us from behaving in the right way. We can subsidise things that are good for us. We can have the government provides goods and services like we do with education and health that we particularly want. There's that list again. I mean, you need to sort of read up on them, find out more about these. There are a couple of slides that I've got here that look at the difference between carbon taxes and tradable permits, a sort of slightly different approach to looking at pollution. Carbon tax is where obviously you pay a tax on the amount of pollution that you have. Tradable permits is a reference to the fact that companies are issued and can buy permits to pollute, and the incentive is not to have to buy them and therefore to cut their level of pollution. So there's a market for these permits that exist in both Europe and in North America. They run those sort of systems. The various COP meetings are international agreements to try and cut environmental pollution. Don't forget, if you're higher level, that you need to be able to calculate the welfare areas. So all of those welfare areas that I've just shown you on the diagrams could come up in paper 3, where they ask you to actually calculate it. Standard level, you just need to know the areas exist, but there's some examples of calculations that revolve around here. And high level, you need to know that